Welcome, everyone, to the Cultivating Compassion Education series, sponsored by Compassionate Care ALS. We have a special holiday program in store for you tonight, our opportunity to thank you and give blessings and appreciation for all that you've brought to our lives here in CCALS. It's my pleasure to introduce our founder and executive director, Ron Hoffman. Hi, Ron.
James. Hello, everyone. All right, so welcome. Thanks for taking an hour out of your evening to be with us. We thought how different and how beautiful and how wonderful it would be uh, for us, some of our staff here at CCALS, to, in some ways, thank you. Each and every one of you a representative who we'll be speaking of. Stories are so often very similar. And, we've been doing this for such a long time. We have had the incredible gift and the extraordinary pleasure of working not just with you folks, but with literally thousands of others. So your representation of those we've worked with in the past. And, in our work, we witness some extraordinary circumstances. And each of you has a story. Each and every family we see, we engage with, has a story. And for me, and I'll speak for our team, there's such gratitude for y'all allowing us to walk alongside you for all these years. The general public, respectfully, in my opinion, really has no idea what it must be meaning to live with or care for someone living with. And as you know, our work just isn't about the individual diagnosed with ALS, but it's for the caregiver, the family, the community. And so in that, we have built this extraordinary relational model. It's about relationships. And there's no way that I could do this work any other way. It's about getting to know people. And some folks we become incredibly, incredibly close with. Deep friendships. It goes on and on and on. And obviously, many of you are in the process of living with ALS. Others have lost a loved one. And so before I introduce our first staff person, I want to read a poem, just maybe set the tone. And I love this poem. And Brenda Fox introduced it a while back. Grief is a funny thing. It's a beautiful thing. Grief always doesn't have to be about sorrow and loss. Grief can be about the celebration of the loved ones that we remember. And grief, for those of you who have heard me speak to it in my world, is just love. So why would I stop grieving this person who I've lost in the physical realm? Because they're gone, because my love still holds. We still carry. So for myself, our staff, I grieve often, but that grief doesn't take me to a place where I don't function. Grief doesn't make me sad. Maybe at some point I'm sad at the loss, but grief is part of our life. It's the love that we have for those who've gone before us. So I'm going to read this poem, and then I'm going to call on our first person to do a sharing. So we have about 10 or 11 shares. And again, the people we're speaking of are representations of all of you. So seriously, thank you so much for being here. And, it's a time of holidays. It's a time of love. It's a time for hugs and just holding space for one another and having a huge appreciation for another. And I do know the appreciation that we all have for all of you and all of those we work with runs very, very deep. Very deep. So this is called Grief is a Coral Reef. Grief is a coral reef. When somebody else tries to tell you how you should grieve, smile and forgive them through your watering eyes. And then imagine how lonely it must be to be the person who audits the tears of other people. The well-intended will tell you how long you should miss your beloved, but you should take your time. Grief is a hedge maze, and being lost inside of it is more than okay. Don't race through your heartache because you might just miss a miracle or two. And the teardrops rolling down your face, don't grieve quickly just to make somebody else feel better. If you need to, let your grief become a coral reef. Let the algae of your hurt slowly form over the years into the softest violet hue of heaven. It can take 2 lifetimes to recover when our beloved becomes an empty chair. It's okay. Take as much time as you need. Your healing is your healing, and the scars of absence will itch longer than you can imagine. But that is because you risk to love deeply. And that is far better than the alternative. I am proud of you and the courage it takes you to grieve so fearlessly. Don't listen to those who want you to go back to normal. Normal will never exist again for those of us who have lost part of our heart. If the moon broke in half, would it feel normal? To hell with normal. Normal was their scent on your collar. Normal was their voice resting in your ear. Normal was their touch on your skin. You have a new normal. It's looking at the shape of clouds for messages from the great beyond that your beloved is fine. You have a new normal. It's building a cabin in the woods of your memory where you and your beloved can meet for lunch. You have a new normal. It's crying and laughing at the same time whenever their favorite song plays on the radio. Grief isn't the enemy of life. Numbness is. Don't become numb to your suffering. Welcome it in and let it wrap you up like a blanket. Whenever it shows up at your door, it's okay. I swear it's okay. Your beloved misses you just as much as you miss them. And someday you too will get all tangled up together again. Someday you too will push each on a swing again under a shower of falling blooms. And someday you too will ride comets together on the edge of everything. And someday you too will giggle at all the idiots who try to tell you how to grieve. Yeah. So thank you for that. Oh my goodness. Eileen Gary.
Good evening, everybody. Hi, David. One of my dear friends. Hi, Susan. Thinking of Jeff today. Eileen, Jody, and all of my friends. It's an honor to be here today. And I want to share a eulogy from Nancy Chapin's brother, John. Nancy recently found her way home, and she was the epitome of who all of you, my friends, are to me. You welcome us into into your homes, into your stories, and into our hearts. So I'm honored to be able to be there to witness the resilience and bravery and courage that you all have. And before I read this eulogy, I want to read a quotation that I've shared with others before, and it's a quotation from Thomas Thurman. I'm sorry, I'm a little choked up here. and I saw this quote just before I started this journey here, walking alongside folks living with ALS, and it's called Aliveness. So it goes like this: don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and then go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. And never have I felt so alive, walking alongside all of our friends and families. So this eulogy is by John Chapin, and it goes like this. My sister Nancy was about the most decent human being you're ever going to meet. I always said, if you didn't get along with Nancy, it was you. And we lost her too soon, 64. I've often wondered why some jerks live until 103 and we lose a light like Nancy at 64. We may never understand why that happens, but we've got to find a way to carry on, because to honor her life, we've got to fully live what's left of ours. Those of you who know Nancy know she was very spiritual. She read a lot. She was always looking to learn and get better, as was I. So we had a lot of discussions about life over the years. After she got diagnosed with ALS, we still discussed the importance of not taking life for granted, of living life while we can, but also what comes next, what's beyond. The past couple of weeks, we realized things were coming to an end. She emphasized the importance of everyone moving on from this. She said, I believe I'm going home. I'm going to be with Mom and Dad in a beautiful place. Either way, I'll be out of pain, no more struggle. That's something to celebrate, not mourn. I told her, I know, but I'm going to miss you. And other people are going to miss you. It's selfish maybe, but it's going to hurt. And she said, I get it. It's natural to grieve, but don't get stuck there. Don't spend too much time in that place. You've got to live your life, and not halfway, but all the way. And she said, and that's my message for everyone, to fully live the life they have left, to be the best versions of themselves. The world still needs them, and there are people that need them, not part of them, but all of them. Nancy would never say it herself, but I'll say it. She gave as an example of how we should live the rest of our lives. We were talking about work once, and she said, it's pretty simple. It's 3 things. Be known as the hardest worker in the workplace, have a great attitude, and get along with people. And that's why she was extremely successful. And when you think of it, she really lived her whole life like that. When it came to her friends, she worked hard in those relationships. She was committed, loyal, and had great attitude. She got along with everyone. She put others first. If you were doing something with Nancy, like going out to eat, you were going to end up going where you wanted to go. Not because she was a pushover, but because what made her happy was just being with you and seeing you have a great time. She found joy in our joy. That's a rare gift. Nancy was the definition of character, integrity, and honesty. As kids, we used to ride our bikes to a local store and buy candy. One time, the guy gave Nancy back too much change. He gave her an extra dime, and Nancy counted her change, realized the mistake, and handed it back to him and said, here, you gave me too much. And he thanked her. That was the early 70s and when we were kids, so a dime seemed like something. One of the kids said, you could have had an extra dime. And Nancy said, I could never do that. That would be like stealing. A few years back, a bunch of us went to breakfast, and when we got home, Nancy realized she messed up on the waitress's tip. She drove all the way back. It was only a $15 bill. She thought 20% and wrote $2. She went all the way back to give an extra $2. If everyone in the world was like Nancy, we wouldn't have wars. People would be civil and understanding, and we'd have more caring and love. We wouldn't have people unfriending people on Facebook because of who they're voting for or calling each other names. The golden rule would rule the day. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Then we have her example of strength and courage that she displayed when she got diagnosed with ALS. Not once did I hear her say, "Why me?" I never once heard her complain. She was looking for what she could still do. She went out with friends, played golf. She was going to live at the highest level possible for as long as possible. I remember once she was doing gratitude exercise, and she said the thing she was most grateful for was her disease because it deepened and strengthened her relationships. She said, "I've seen so much kindness in other people, and I've never been on the receiving end of more empathy, understanding, and love." She said, "I'm blown away by the goodness in people." If you knew Nancy, her being born and passing on the same day, October 23rd, was so her. She was organizing everything, paid attention to detail, and always thinking of others. She went to the funeral home last September and set up everything. She even wrote her own obituaries to make things easier on Jean and me. We lost a light. The world's a darker place, but it doesn't have to be. We can still shine her light, and we can amplify it by all of us living by example. Show kindness and caring and understanding. Give them the benefit of the doubt and try to see things from their point of view. I remember I was with Nancy once and someone cut her off on the road and she said, "I hope that person's okay." She remembered driving all the way home from Boston after her ALS diagnosis and realized that in her state of mind, she might have accidentally cut someone off or something similar. It reminds me of a saying by the philosopher Nietzsche, "Be kind, for everyone is fighting a tough battle." Love you, sis, and I miss you. See you on the other side. Your brother, John. So that's Nancy Chapin. I wanted to introduce all of you to her. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. Oh, let's go over to Ann Seymour. Ann.
Good evening. It's so lovely to be with everybody. I have the honor and privilege of joining Compassionate Care in 2023 as a care liaison. The work is fulfilling beyond expectation. It's amazing to show up on a doorstep as a stranger and be invited into a person's life and become an instant friend, helpful resource, and source of comfort. As the American humanistic psychologist Carl Rogers says, there is an instant, unconditional, positive regard as the connections are made on a deeply personal and fundamentally human level. Each visit is unique despite the common diagnosis of ALS that unites this community. I am immensely grateful for having the opportunity to listen, be present, and to bring the many offerings from Compassionate Care to lighten the burden of the disease. I've learned so much from hearing individual stories, the tales of travel, career successes, relationships, and sometimes sharing some laughs, as well as the myriad challenges of going about daily living. I'm constantly astonished by the bravery, courage, grace, and dignity I witness when tending to our families. I had the privilege of visiting and connecting with a woman named Judy Bergen several times. Judy would share the many joys she experienced in her life. She was devoted to and deeply loved by her family and friends. She described herself as a domestic engineer when I asked her what she had done for a living, which I thought was wonderful. She has two exceptionally loving and involved sons. Her son Noah fondly recalled the delicious food she made for her family, especially the lasagna. While we discussed how the disease was gradually challenging Judy and shrinking her physical capacity to function in the world, she wanted to keep living to the fullest on her own terms. Judy loved to travel, and she had visited about 100 countries. At one of our visits this past spring, she announced that she was planning to make what would likely be one last trip to attend her oldest grandson's graduation from college. This meant facing an 8-hour car ride, figuring out how she would keep her head supported, how she was going to get out of the car to use the bathroom, and sleep comfortably in a hotel. She did make it to the graduation and was overjoyed. She was so proud of her grandson and described it as a happy trip. As a devoted mother-in-law, Judy helped her daughter-in-law, Adriana, study for her U.S. citizenship exam. Judy proudly attended the celebration of Adriana becoming a U.S. citizen at Sturbridge Village in July, shortly before she passed. After Judy's celebration of life this past August, Noah invited some of us up to Judy's apartment. Judy was a collector and she had a lot of cool things. In particular, she had an astonishing collection of beautiful Limoges boxes. Noah offered them up and said to select something that spoke to us. I chose this little whimsical chick springing out from an egg. It so reminded me of Judy, so charming, sparkling, and popping up to be alive in the world. I left that day feeling so grateful to have known this lovely woman and her family. We make these connections with a full heart and being all in on sharing our family's journeys. This is the season of giving, and I can't think of any other work I'd rather be doing than providing the love and support to our compassionate care individuals and families. I hope everybody has a peaceful and beautiful holiday.
Thank you, Ann. Oh, let's go to Christine Copley.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christine. I help people with speech and access to their technology, and I've been with CCALS for over 10 years now. We love everyone. We love everyone. And in doing this work, we see so much. We see people with extreme wealth. We see people in extreme poverty. We see beautiful relationships, and we see broken relationships. We see people in acceptance and adjusting to the changes that are required with the progression of this disease. And then we see people that are angry, scared, incredulous that ALS has come knocking upon their door. My story comes from March 2016. And at that time, I had met hundreds of people with ALS and kind of was over the shock of some situations. But when Ron asked me to meet this family, he says, talk to me first. So I get with Ron and he's like, okay, this one's a little different than the others. This person is an ex-con. This person has been in federal prison in the South, and she is no longer a threat to society. And she's moving home to her elderly parents to have them take care of her. So imagine two retirees. I know Ron is going, oh, he didn't know who this was about. Imagine being in your 70s, retired, and being thrust into the care position for your adult child. And then Ron adds to that, and by the way, she was a he. And I went, oh. And, 8, 9 years ago, we didn't really have a whole lot of transgender people, and this was my first. So I scheduled a visit with her mom, and that day I'm running late, and then I got stuck behind a bus, and I come like, running into this house, and I'm a little frazzled. And I go up the stairs, I press the button, the doorbell, and the mom opens the door, and it's a small house. So, when you open up the front door, you're in the living room. And there she is. There she is. And she's in her permobile, and her hands are in her lap, and she's wearing a dress, and she's got long hair, and she's got makeup. And she says to me, "Nice to see you." Nice to see you. And before I walked in that door, I was feeling a little snarky. This whole thing about trans, I didn't really get it. It was kind of weird and whatever, but I was thinking, oh, sit around the dinner table tonight. I got something fun to talk about. But when I showed up and saw this woman say, "Nice to see you," my heart went like this. And I just had such love for this woman. And I realized as I looked at her that she's a human being with ALS who is worthy of my best efforts just as much as anybody else. And I felt love. So the two of us ended up sitting together. Her parents were terrible with technology, and she was really good at it. And so very quickly we came up with a communication solution that was fitting for her. And then I visited her again, and she talked to me about life in prison. And she was a yoga instructor, which again, yoga and ALS usually don't go together. So that was kind of interesting and exciting. But then she started talking to me about how her fellow inmates were so good to her and how they took care of her, and that incarcerated men don't have the opportunity to show love and compassion to other people, and they did for her. And she misses them, she missed them, and she missed the connection with them, which was really cool too. I ended up confessing to her my snarky, ignorant feelings before I had walked in the door about people that were transgendered. And I told her, it's embarrassing, but I'm really glad that I had met her. And she said to me, "When you meet people like me again, please remember me." So here we are, close to 9 years later, and I still have her here. So in closing, this work is a gift, and it's exposed me to people in situations that I never would have seen otherwise and never would have encountered. And I see things that inspire me, and I see things that I don't want to be like. But this job is just one big lesson in growth. And I like who I am today, and I like who I'm becoming. And I'm very grateful for CCLS to give me this opportunity to use my gifts. I'm grateful to know my fellow colleagues, and I'm grateful for all of you here. Happy holidays.
Oh, wow. Hmm.
I spoke to her mom this morning to say hi.
Hmm. That was beyond a story. The transgender piece was a super small part of this story. Thank you, Christine, very much. Let's go to Susanna Mikowski. Susanna.
Hi, everybody. Ron, thank you. Thank you all. I first want to just share, I am officially part of CCALS now on staff. is coming up 2 years. This is kind of my 2-year anniversary now. And before that, I was on the board after having met Ron a long time ago and sitting at the bedside with him and seeing, it felt like a dance in some ways of being together, just a mutual respect, a deep sense of respect for the person before us, but also in the way the listening unfolded. And I think that one of the things that I heard in Ron's voice, which is something that has really been a theme in my life as a physician, is that each of our patients and our families that we tend to are our greatest teachers. And I want to reflect on a few on this role as each one of you as teachers. And as teachers at every stage of this illness. Just as Christine said, teachers, whether people are handling this with grace or struggling through it and with anger, however it is, the way that you invite us into your lives and trust us with that space allows us to learn to grow, not only in terms of learning about ALS and living with this illness, but teaches us about humanity and humankind and love and resilience and integrity and open-heartedness. The teachers I've encountered this past year have not only taught me individually, but also I want to thank all the people who opened up, came and joined a group of high school students who I brought from Rochester, New York to Massachusetts to join with some of you and to listen to your stories. This group of high school students were finishing up a year where they had done an elective in hospice care and end-of-life care and been with people who were very much near the end of life and had been sitting with them and tending to them, sometimes for days, sometimes for hours, sometimes over a number of months. And then they get to meet people living with ALS. And what they imparted and saw was how loss happens at so many stages of life, and how grace and integrity and how muddy life can be, but when we connect and trust each other in community, what that can impart and mean. And they understood, they saw through learning from staff and certainly from some of you who joined us, the magic of what it means to connect and the healing and the joy that can happen there, even in the most difficult of circumstances. So first, I want to thank all of you who were part of that teaching. And next, I want to share a story of a gentleman who I met when a neuropalliative care fellow was shadowing me as part of this work. And we met Emil in Oswego, New York, and he had learned of his ALS diagnosis just a few weeks prior, but couldn't get in to see any neurology ALS clinic. We got a call in late May and we saw him early June, and he was told then that he might not get into an ALS clinic until September. So this neuro fellow and I were the first people he was going to meet after hearing the words ALS associated with him, and he had a lot of questions. Opening up, he was sitting there with his wife and his daughter, and I asked, how do you want to start this? What would you like us to know about you that would make a difference today and going forward? What's important for us to know? And he said, you know the song Old Man River? What you need to know is I'm tired of living, but I'm afraid of dying. So how am I going to do this? How is this going to unfold? And his wife and daughter were just blown away by the statement because they didn't know it was going to go there. They thought this was going to be an informational session about what is ALS and what equipment can I get and how am I going to live and when can I get, what's going to happen. But he said, I'm tired of living, but afraid of dying. And how am I going to handle that? He held space and he was able to have these conversations with with weaves of songs and stories of his golfing time. We're talking about his grandnephew who he adored like a grandson and his amazing golf swing and how he wished he could go out there and join him again, but at the same time really didn't want to leave his room and his couch at that point in time. He said he didn't, at that point, his choice was he didn't really want to try non-invasive ventilation. But when his wife and daughter asked, could you try it just for us for a little bit? He looked at them and said, for you, I will. But together they tried things out and shifted down the road. And he helped create that space and carry them into a readiness for what was to come. And they were able to see how he was tired of living, but he started to find more and more joy in his time with his family because forbidden topics, forbidden discussions had been removed. And then he started becoming less afraid of what would come next. His wife had been looking forward to moving to this new apartment that was right near Lake Ontario and closer to the center of town. And you could see he was getting really tired, but he waited until they moved. And it was shortly after that that he let go and that he died very peacefully. And when his family gathered, it really was kind of a celebration the way that Brenda talked about. You could feel the richness of the grief and the gratitude, but also the joy of the love and some of his snarkiness that he brought into the world. What I can share also is what he taught. I remember speaking with that fellow afterwards, and she was blown away by how opening up a conversation and what it meant to really lean in and listen by putting her own clinical agenda aside and allowing the space for his story to emerge, and what that did to allow her to understand the heart of what was most important, the heart of the care, and why we were both really there. And she, I know, will never forget him as one of her most important teachers. I certainly won't. And I know that those Harley students who met a number of you last spring will carry you forward as they're in college and going forward, and we hope to have them back again. But I want to thank you all and let you know how much gratitude I have and for being such important teachers about living, about life, about resilience, about integrity, about trust. And thank you for letting us into your lives. And Ron, thank you for allowing this space and this kind of work to happen. So thank you all.
Thank you, Susanna. Christopher Cooley.
Hello, everybody. I'm Christopher Cooley, and I've been have the pleasure of working for Compassionate Care ALS now for 5 years. Probably the best 5 years of my entire life, work-wise, that is. I was honored to be a part of tonight's meeting, and I knew right away who I would speak about. And I can only say his first and last initial. So it'll be Mark B. Mark B was the very first intake I took at CCALS. And I remember the phone call like it was yesterday. He had a wonderful personality. He was very funny. And he knew the severity of his situation. And I had taken the call and I had created the file and really never thought much of it until one day Ron came to me and says, "Hey, would Mark B is staying at the retreat center for a little bit. Could you go and spend a little time with him?" And I thought, oh yeah, absolutely. So I did. And at work, I'd go over, spend a couple of hours, and it turned into going over on a Saturday and a Sunday. And it turned into the first time we met, it was like we had known each other for years. And Mark was very tenacious, and he fought hard. He didn't want to give up driving. He didn't want to give up this, and I'm not going to do this, and I'm not going to do that. And I just adored his tenacity. But he did succumb to stopping the driving and maybe using the Carmen wheelchair here and there. And he faced his adversity. And it was really something to witness because it taught me something about myself. It taught me how to live in the moment and live in the now and live with what I have here and not worry about because Mark didn't. He knew things were going to progress. And he did. He was full of life. And he was a man that I probably should have met 20 years earlier. And we talked about that as we laughed at many, many things. And we used to walk up and down the Falmouth bike path, and he'd be in his wheelchair, and we'd be going up and down. We'd be talking about Boston in the old days. And he turned into a friend. He would call me on a Saturday or a Sunday when I was at home. "How's Michelle? How's Frank? How's this?" And I'm thinking to myself, wow, this guy's taking time out of his life to just reach out to me. And it was an honor to know him and an honor to work for him and with CCALS. Mark was really one of the first people I knew with ALS. I was a caretaker for my parents for many, many years. It was very trying. It was very daunting. But they did not have ALS. So witnessing it firsthand and witnessing how beautiful that Mark handled his situation, that to live in the now, I think that's the biggest thing I took away from it. And it's a privilege for me to work for CCALS and all of these beautiful people I do work with, my colleagues, and all of you who allow us in and allow us to find out things about ourselves, which is nice. So, thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Oh, where to? Michael Hodgkins.
Hey, everybody. Michael Hodgkins. I've been with CCLS about 4 years. And when James asked me to do this, it was immediate. It was a no-brainer for me. It was actually my first foray into getting my own clients. And Ron and I were going to go around, except Ron got sick. So I did them on my own that day. And the first two were quite shaky. And the third one was John Perral. And I met John, and somebody said it here. As soon as I shook his hand, I was like, oh my God, where have you been? And I sat on his porch for a very long time, and we talked about everything. He talked about end of life. He talked about he was going to move downstairs, and he had one of the coolest back porches I've ever seen in my life. And I remember when I got home, I had a couple more intakes after that, but when I got home, I was writing in my own journal, and I wrote down, "This one's gonna hurt." And he was in Conway, Mass, which was a pain in the ass to get to. And there wasn't really many other people around him, but I would stop by. And then he decided he was going to go into the Fisher home in Amherst, the hospice home there, because it would be easier for his family, because he was at 24/7. He became 24/7 care because he was constantly on a BiPAP machine. So what I did was, because I'm up and down 91 corridor, it was easy for me to stop by and see John almost once a week, or every other week, and we would sit and chat. And he was so easy to talk to, and funny, and love of poetry. We both had that love of poetry. And then Fisher home needed work done, so they took everybody out of there and they put them all in this nursing home down the road. And what they did was they gave them all the same staff. And whoever, John would laugh. He said every time he had the same staff at this nursing home, though, right? So he didn't have to train new people. But when new people would come in to Fisher House, he was the one that trained them on every piece of equipment that he had. And boy, you better have it right. And then one time back, I can't even tell you when. I think it was in late summer. A dear friend of mine passed away. I was his healthcare proxy, and I had never really. I mean, I'd been healthcare proxy many times, but never did I had to go and pull the plug. And I had to do that for my friend Harry. And it was devastating. And it was 6 weeks before I saw John again. And when I walked into the room, he says, "Well, where the hell have you been?" And I said, "Well, we're like really busy. I just haven't been around this area." And he goes, "Is that right? So really, why? Where you been and what's going on?" Like he just, read right through me. And I just sat down. I just said I lost a dear friend, and we talked about that. And he was such an amazing man. He was such an amazing man. And he never stopped. When I first met him, he was all about trail riding on a trail bike. He was about kayaking, and he was still all doing that stuff. His friends had done a GoFundMe page and got him this big balloon tire trike, electric, so he could still travel with them. And these guys, they were friends for many, many years, since they were little kids. And one Friday I stopped by, and I said, "How you doing?" He said, "Well," he says, "I'm all done with this." He says, "I'm all done with this fight. I'm not going to do it anymore. I struggle every single day. I've struggled for the last 6 months with every single breath. And I'm going to have the last word on ALS. And I'm taking the BiPAP machine off Sunday at 10 a.m. And I just felt the tears just start streaming down my face. I was like devastated. And I was like, "Well, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to drive here in the van, and I'm going to hold a vigil out on the picnic table, and I'll bring a candle and just burn a candle." And he said, "No, you won't." He said, "You're going to come right in here, and you're going to sit with the rest of my friends and family." And that just blew me away. And that was Friday. So, I went Sunday, And because I'd been a caregiver, private caregiver for terminally ill men since 2015, you know, I just figured that they probably started him with morphine. He'd be a little groggy by the time I got there. And so I was kind of dragging my feet. So I finally got there about 8:45. I walk in. This aide comes around the corner. He says, "Are you Mike?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, John's been waiting for you." I said, "What?" And I walk in the door, and Ron will know what I'm talking about. He's sitting in his bed. He's sitting up. He's got his laptop in front of him. He's doing what John does. And where have you been? I'm like, what the hell? And so I said, "I'm going to FaceTime Ron. Ron wants to talk with you." So I had my iPhone and I did the FaceTime, but I had it backwards. And so John had no patience for anybody who didn't know technology. So I successfully was the last person to ever piss him off. And he said, "You got to turn it around, Mike." So I took my phone and I actually turned it around instead of turning the screen around. And he says, "What the hell are you doing?" I said, "You said turn it around." He said, "How do you not know this?" And I just started to laugh. So Ron was able to talk to him and we had a chat. And then I sat there and for the day until he took his last breath. It was a powerful thing. And he made his own playlist. And, you know, there'd be a song that would come on and somebody would start singing it really low, and then somebody else, and then somebody else. And then next thing you know, everybody in the room, there was about 20 of us, and everybody'd be singing the song. And one of the songs that he put on there in the playlist is William Shatner has an album. And one of the songs is We're All Gonna Die. And that's the name of the song. And he sings that. And by unanimous decision, everybody said, "You're not playing that song again, John. That is it." And so that was an incredible, powerful thing for me to be that. First of all, that I walked in there after 6 weeks and he could tell I was full of shit, that there was more than me just being busy for 6 weeks. And I actually read him one of Harry's poems about ancestors. That was it was really incredibly powerful. But, you know, and there's so many more people like that. I'm just, I am blessed. And yeah, my life winds through all these people in so many ways. One of the other intakes I did was this other guy in Florence, Mass, who he asked me, "Well, where'd you grow up?" I said, "I grew up in the Berkshires, in a little town called Lee." He said, "Oh, I know Lee. You know Chris Hodgkins?" I said, "Yeah, he's my younger brother." He said, "I worked with him in the State House for 20 years. So, you know, crazy stuff. And yeah, and I just want to shout out to David Baldwin, because David and I had the first job in our lives was at A&P, Stock and Shelves, I believe. Was that right? Yeah. And Mr. Olivier, Thursdays aren't just best part is the end with the corniest jokes on the planet. And Peter Quinn, love you, man. I'll be there soon for a shave. Yeah, that's it. I love being part of this organization. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Okay. Brenda Fox.
Hi, everybody. It is so good to be here. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the gift that my dad gave to me walking with ALS, with humor and grace and generosity, and the gift that Ron gifted our family with 14 years ago. So that starts the chain of gratitudes that I have for all of you. And there are many, many, many more. I am going to try and screen share, and Michael and I have a rivalry to see who is least technologically adept. And so we'll aim here and see if we can pull this off with some photos. 4 years ago, 4 years ago, CCALS started our gatherings. And it's really impossible for me to use words to describe just how much I learn and how blessed I am by the gatherings and how much wisdom I gain in those gatherings and how much happens to change my life. Leah, whose husband passed at just after 30 years old, was diagnosed with ALS when he was 28. Attended as many of the gatherings as she could in the midst of caring for her husband and 2 small children. Rich was diagnosed when she was pregnant with their second child. And so through the rigors of her caregiving, the grief of seeing her husband's disease progress, the challenges of parenting 2 small children and working as a nurse, every attendance that Leah gave to women of ALS, to the caregiver to caregiver gathering, to our mothers of ALS, every attendance was a miracle. She shared through her tears, her candor, her beauty, the struggles, and everything that she shared was heard and held by each circle she attended. She had a way of rising to everyone's list of superheroes, and folks often marveled at her circumstances and her resolve. Her courage gave others courage to be honest and to be real, to be emboldened and share their own stories. Betsy Segura, let me see if I can get out of this photo. And I'll show you this one of Arthur, Maeve, and Leah. Betsy attended our gatherings from her home in Mexico. Betsy was caring for her Jaime, her husband of more than 30 years, as he was declining with ALS. Betsy and Leah had overlapped in a number of gatherings, so they knew each other. They heard each other's stories, but they'd never met in person. And when Betsy heard of Rich's passing, months after Jaime had passed, she phoned me to say that she was sure she needed to make a quilt for Leah after Rich's passing. Betsy couldn't promise when or what, but she knew that she just had to make a quilt. And she arrived at our October Honey Grief retreat with the fruits of her labor. So this Mexican star quilt arrived and came in, and it was beautiful. And it was what she had done for Leah. How it is that across borders and across generations and diverse life experiences, one woman's sharing her truth connects to another woman across the borders. How is it that that makes a connection enough that generosity shows up and love is forged and relationships are connected? Each of our gatherings, the sacred conversations, as David White calls them, is a profoundly deep and healing connection. And it shines the light on the rare and unanticipated joy of doing this work. That one woman's story and creativity and compassion can touch another woman's struggle and create a web of care in the midst of this devastating disease. This is beyond a connection beyond borders, beyond calculation, beyond our categories of giving and receiving. We give without expectation, and the gifts are given without greed. It is only my hope that in this coming year, with each of the honored connections of each of our families, that I can stretch and grow into the patterns of grace that Betsy and Leah and all of the other women have touched my life with so deeply, and that maybe I too can be reduced to joy, as Mark Nepo says, and he claims that This is the truth of this work for me, till we know each other. And he says, and what if we're meant to discover that caring for another is the summit? This work has so many summits, and the people lead me and guide me in ways that I'm grown and stretched. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, Brenda. So the threads, the weaving of all the threads, the interconnectedness. And what's extraordinary to me is what you've heard are just snippets, such a small piece of a story. There's so much more, not with just those who are spoken of, but for each of you and every family out there who is you, and you are they. And what we do, consciously or unconsciously, is we remember. We remember the person Christine spoke of. I was thinking of just yesterday, not knowing who she was speaking of. That had nothing to do with it. We remember every day. I remember. I was thinking of my friend Jim Rebello, and I met Jim in 2005, and Jim passed in 2007. And two young sons, lived in Rhode Island, right near the Paw Sox baseball field. Incredible community. But I was just remembering all the little visits. And then, of course, 2 hours later that day, I get an email from his son, who I hadn't seen in years. I mean, he's in his 30s now, for goodness sakes. And then, of course, I was thinking of Holly Ladd, who was on our board. And Holly, I met in 2012. She passed in 14. But just thinking of her, and then I see a post from her wife and their son. And it was actually her birthday 2 days ago. And then, of course, I often remember my dear friend Doug Oakley. And Doug was such an incredible part of this organization. He joined our board early on. And I met Doug in 2011. And he loved the visions that I had for our center. And without Doug, I can confidently say the center wouldn't have happened, because he believed. And Doug was an incredible teacher. And for those of you who know me, I'm often telling stories. And oftentimes, some folks in healthcare don't appreciate it because of HIPAA, but I have permission to tell stories. How else do we bring humanity into it without truth? And Doug was all about truth. But one of the big teachings he gave me early on, we were having lunch in the Silver Lounge, and we were at the bar. And he was somewhat early on, moving a little slow. But the food comes, and he's looking around like this. And I just gently pass him the salt and pepper and go about eating my food. And then literally I could feel the burning sensation, like a knife is going through my neck, metaphorically speaking. And I turn around, and it's Doug staring at me. And it's like he had a knife in his hand, right? And he said, if you ever do that again, I will knock you out. And I went, oops. And I knew exactly what he was talking about. I passed him the salt and pepper. He didn't ask me to pass him the salt and pepper. The moral of the story is that really taught me to ask permission. Ask permission before I do anything. for someone that I'm visiting living with ALS. Don't assume. That's what he taught me. Might sound trivial, but it's not. The next time we're out to eat, I see him looking around. May I pass you the salt and pepper? He said, yes, thank you. But Doug was a very huge piece. He was an extraordinary man who lived incredibly consciously and loved fiercely his community, his wife, his family. He loved us. He loved what CCALS was all about. And so I'll always be indebted to Doug, as I'm indebted to all of our families and to each and every one of you. And to our incredible team that we have who show up day in and day out for our families. And for the work that we do, for the work that they do, and for the work that each and every one of you do. Again, it's an extraordinary circumstance to be living in the world of ALS, living day in and day out, whether you're living with ALS or you're a caregiver. And both are very equal in how we show up for the families and individuals caring for, tending to, and living with. So that is that's the gathering, that's the program. And I leave you with, always know, we remember with incredible hearts and with incredible gratitude for each and every one of you. Please have safe holidays. Love well, care well, and know that we're here. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks, everyone. And in the tradition of the Men of ALS, we happen to have our resident joke teller and his wife, who's gonna outdo him with an even worse joke than the one he's gonna tell. But Bill Olivier has been in the Men of ALS gathering from the beginning, almost 4 years ago. He's been to almost every meeting. He brings joy. He brings inspiration, optimism. He's got ALS, you know. He can't move. He can't move anymore. But look at him smiling. He's wearing his Santa cap. He always just brings beauty and love to all of us. And he brings a really bad joke every meeting too. So, Bill, if you want to start, and we'll see if Karen can top you, and that'll be our grand finale.
And please remember, folks, these are really bad jokes. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
He says he always prefaces them by, "You think you've got it bad with ALS? Well, wait till I'm done with you." So go ahead, Bill.
Go ahead.
on a positive note, I want to thank you that, my wife and primary caregiver and soulmate is here with me tonight. And we are extremely fortunate and extremely lucky to have had CCALS in our lives from really close to the start of when I was diagnosed with ALS a little over 4 years ago. And I'm also very happy to be part of the Men of ALS and been part of it for also over 4.5 years. So thank you all staff of CCALS for everything that you do. You make us feel like we're part of your family and you're part of our family. So thanks again. Here goes my my wonderful, terrible joke. And it's in keeping with the holiday seasons. Do you know what nationality Santa Claus is?
No.
North Polish.
Okay.
All right, I could do worse. I'm his wife, Karen, and happy to be his primary caregiver and happy to be a CCALS family member. Okay, this is not a holiday joke, but I do have one. why aren't koala bears actual bears? Plus, they don't meet the qualifications. But I have one Christmas joke. Okay. What did Adam say the night before Christmas?
I don't know.
It's Christmas Eve. Okay, that's it.
All right. I think you surpassed him.
With the bad jokes. Yeah.
Thanks,
Don't worry, I
everybody.
have a worse one for the guys on Thursday.
I hope so.
A more painful one.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Happy holidays.
Thank you, Ron and everybody.
All of you spoke to, very much appreciate it.